As your family tree grows, so should your investments. From creating a safety net for your family to planning for grandchildren, we have the investment solution for you. 91. Investing for a world of change. 91 is an authorized FSP.
Operations are now seeking more than just the basic travel arrangements to their tour operators. TUI's advertising and social content is playing a crucial role in communicating its much broader range of travel and leisure experiences. So it's absolutely great to have you on the podcast. And for those of you who find the name Horry familiar, some might say you were kind of destined for a career in this industry because you were brought up surrounded by the world of creatives and ad agencies, because your late father,
Yes.
David Horry, who passed away sadly in February 2023, he was the renowned art director at many agencies, CDP, I think, Lowe, WCRS, Saatchi's. So you must have grown up entirely surrounded by the kind of great and the good of Adland.
Yeah, it was, some of my earliest memories are of advertising-related things. I mean, he used to sort of sometimes take me to the office. I think when I was about 5, going to the office of CDP on the Euston Road. And even then thinking, this is a pretty good job. I think this is something to aspire to. I think the only rule they had was no pool before 11 o'clock. And given that everyone seemed to disappear for lunch about 12:30, then only left about an hour of actual work to be done during the day. So, but of course, they did some incredible work at the time, which still I think stands up today. So yes, I've quite fond memories of that, and I often still look back at some of that advertising.
I think I'm right about this, which is that I'd always heard a legend when I joined advertising that there was an art director, and your dad was an art director, who got his first job, I think, because he turned up for an interview at 9 o'clock in the morning, which sounds unfeasibly early for the advertising instrument time. Maybe it was 9:30, but he'd already completed the Times crossword. And whereas this might have been merely a bonus mark on the part of a copywriter, for an art director to do that was considered practically miraculous.
At his best, he did the Times crossword in about 10 minutes. I mean, I can just about do the quick cryptic. That's probably about my level.
The 10-minute thing astounds me. I've never managed. I've probably done it in 17 minutes or something at a personal best.
Right.
But anything under half an hour, I consider a bit of a triumph. So this is astounding. Yeah, yes, absolutely wonderful.
I mean, my other favourite story of that ilk was, I think it was Graham Fink who turned up for an interview to be told that they were looking for someone a bit older. So he went away and bought a sort of a wig and dressed on a shoulder and came back in the afternoon and said, "How about now?" And they gave him the job.
That was Graham. You're absolutely right. Yeah. He came back with, I think, his hair greyed. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. I missed that, actually. And by the way, I think one of the things we've lost is we've kind of formalised recruitment in a way that you couldn't, it'd be much more difficult now to explain to HR that you were hiring someone because they were really good at the Times crossword. But actually looking for anybody. Someone also described your dad brilliantly as the man David Horry, who put the DH in ADHD, which I think is fascinating, that he had this kind of incredibly short attention span. I didn't realise this. I always joke that the reason I work in advertising is it's the only way I found where you can monetize ADHD.
I suppose always joking aside, I think the lateral thinking required to be a creative. I mean, clearly I understand the psychology and the physiology around sort of brain chemistry and mechanics, etc. But there is clearly something about the way his brain was wired, which made him sort of, have quite a short attention span, but also allowed him to sort of make some of those leaps that that maybe I wouldn't be able to do.
No, and it's very interesting because you realise that there's a large number of people who find the creative process inherently frustrating precisely because it's non-linear. And it will sometimes require you to abandon everything you've been thinking about for 2 days and start somewhere completely different. And it's only if you're happy to do that you can cope with the job at all. What was it like to go on holiday with him?
Oh, I mean, going on holiday was often reasonably traumatic. I remember. I mean, I don't know if you did this when you had the sort of the mantra of passport, tickets, money, which is almost a sort of joke as you go to the airport. And I remember sitting in the car going to the airport and going, sort of jokingly saying, passport, tickets, money, and his face drained of colour as he realised he'd left his wallet on the side and it was now too late to go back to go get it. So I think I think sometimes I felt like I was the sort of grown up in the situation.
Yeah. My children occasionally said they thought of me as another child in the family, which is, I feel, sort of 10% flattering, 90% rude.
Yeah, I'm very much an airport dad these days, collecting up everyone's passports, walking 3 meters ahead of everyone else, that sort of thing.
So having worked both sides of the marketing fence, having been agency side, obviously actually in two agencies where you're managing director, and then client side, I think, by the way, it's incredibly valuable for every client. I was talking to someone actually at Google who said this, who had agency experience. They said every client needs one person there with agency. It's a bit like yin and yang with the little dots. You need someone client side who's had agency experience, and you need someone agency side who's had client experience. Because without that, there's just this gulf of incomprehension that can sometimes emerge. What sort of perspective did it give you, having worked both sides of the fence?
I mean, first of all, of course, when you work agency side, particularly when you're sort of the beginnings of your career, you work across a whole variety of sectors and clients, and you encounter different personality types. And that in itself is hugely valuable because it means you can start to bring lessons from different sectors. I always found it fascinating when I worked at agencies how, if someone worked in a particular sector, I worked on BMW for a while and they only cared about Audi and Mercedes, didn't care about anything else. So, whereas obviously you can see insights from maybe even Ford or, from a different part of the car industry or from a different sector. I think client side, you can get quite narrow in your thinking quite quickly. So I think, first of all, working agency side constantly encourages you to think more broadly about what you do. So I think that's really important.
No, I think that's a part of agencies which we've actually failed to capitalize on enough, which is surprisingly often you can bring an insight or an idea from one sector to another. We call it cross-category analysis, effectively, where you go, okay, ignore your category for a moment. How would Disney solve this? Or how would, how would some other entity solve this? And quite often you find, weirdly, that there are insights that have emerged and been exploited in, say, the airline industry, which the train industry, the rail industry, is completely blind to. It was years before first-class lounges appeared on railways, for example. Now they're pretty close in many respects, and yet they don't draw inspiration from anyone outside themselves. I'm sure they would have been excited by doing it if another train company had done it, but looking at an airline for inspiration doesn't seem to happen very much.
No, I mean, you can see things like dynamic pricing at the moment, which has always been a thing in certainly in airlines and in travel generally, and other markets starting to try and apply this with varying degrees of success and also varying degrees of acceptance from customers. I think. I mean, I read a story about a pub that was going to implement dynamic pricing, and people are up in arms about it. It's funny how some sectors people just accept it as the norm, and other sectors they sort of totally balk at it if you try to apply it. So
it's worth noting, isn't it? In the travel industry, we forget this. It did take a few decades because there was that famous trope not quite in my childhood, but in my teens, where someone would be on the plane and find that someone else had paid a different price for the same ticket and would go bananas.
Yes.
And I think what happened with the airline industry was that people just got to accept the basic heuristic, which is not totally true, by the way. The earlier you book, the less you pay. And people just came to accept that. Because weirdly, Laker operated the other way around. The weird thing with Laker Airlines was the tickets were cheaper the later you booked. So that was an early attempt at dynamic pricing, which they actually kind of got in reverse. Whereas there's the famous Ryanair hockey stick, which is in the 24 hours before you fly, or maybe 48 hours, the prices just ramp up monumentally. And the argument is it's either a business meeting or it's a funeral. And in either case, you've got no choice but to travel. So why not exploit that? It's very, very interesting that because Coke, Robert Gushweta, I think, got into huge trouble at Coke because he proposed that they were thinking. It was just an aside, it was just a kind of comment. They were thinking of introducing dynamic pricing for Coke vending machines where the price would go up in hot weather. And everybody went bananas. Now, interestingly, if he'd merely reframed it and said, we're thinking of an idea where the price of Coke drops in cold weather, no one would have minded at all, of course, okay? It would have been considered. So this, by the way, I gave a talk at the Highways Agency yesterday, and I said, look, we need to have a really, really big discussion about road pricing, because road pricing is coming in. And if you give the task to economists, they won't do it very well. So just an obvious example, what was kind of dumb about, say, ULEZ charging was the charge was the same whether you lived in London and had, and maybe had to pay ULEZ 200 times a year to get to work, or if you were me and I drive into London 6 times a year. I've got an electric car, but it wouldn't have bothered. ULEZ wouldn't have been a deal breaker for me. Okay, but they never really realised that you needed the equivalent of a season ticket, where someone who had no choice to drive to work at 4 o'clock in the morning could pay a lump sum to cover their travel all year. And they missed that completely. I think it's and actually pricing psychology in travel is interesting, because you obviously have the book early brigade, which of course were historically they were meat and drink to the package tour operators because you had the money early. And then, of course, you have lastminute.com, and there's a whole completely separate market which looks for bargains by going late rather than going early. How's that changed? I'd be really intrigued.
I mean, it does differ even within the travel and holiday sector in terms of the pricing. I mean, it becomes very demand driven. So, constantly looking at, how many seats you've got available and how much you've got less to sell, and adjusting the pricing accordingly, and increasingly relying on algorithms to help you do that. So I don't think there is a common way of doing it anymore. I think everyone does it differently. I mean, on the flip of the sort of dynamic pricing thing, I mean, I think travel has even started to sort of look at subscription pricing. And it's funny how that's one that seems to be really hard to make work in the travel industry, but certainly it seems to work reasonably well in other industries, because it was all the rage about 5 years ago.
So how would you make that? How would that work? I'm intrigued by this.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could have a model whereby you paid a subscription fee, and that somehow facilitated your ability to access holidays or leisure experiences or that sort of thing. But I think partly because what constitutes a great holiday for you will be different to me, will be different to everyone else. It's a very bespoke thing. And therefore, the principle of having a sort of flat fee that covers you, even if you were then allowed to make choices within it, I think psychologically is quite hard for people to get their heads around. And of course, there's massive discrepancies in price. So you can go on holiday for a couple of £100, and you can go on holiday for tens of thousands of pounds. So trying to sort of get to a model which allows for those different factors is really quite hard. So I haven't. I mean, I've seen the odd little experiment in the sector of people trying things, but compared to a lot of other sectors, razor blades or that sort of thing, it certainly hasn't taken off in quite the same way. I guess because maybe that's it. Maybe it's less standard in the way it operates, and therefore any model which is more subscription led is more difficult to implement.
So it's a kind of Amazon Prime based model, which is you pay an annual or monthly fee, and in return you get access to benefits automatically. Is that how the effective plan? I mean, there is an interesting problem with subscription, which is simply nothing to do with the virtues of it as a payment mechanism, but people have a limited appetite for the number of commitments they're prepared to engage in. I mean, there was a group of people who wouldn't even do subscriptions on mobile phones. They wanted pay as you go. And so one of the problems I think you do face is that if you look at the amount of money that disappears 5 days after payday, in the shape of various direct debits to, possibly Sky, possibly, EE, you add it all up. Then you have subscription selling, of course, for lots of online products. And people there is a ceiling beyond which people just aren't prepared to go in terms of the number of subscriptions they have. And so it may be you were simply a bit late to the party, actually. Maybe part of it.
Yeah. My comments are really about travel generally rather than TUI, but I think it's interesting how models in one sector can work perfectly, and in other sectors they're like oil and water; they just don't work. Yeah.
Is there a kind of competitive challenge? I think particularly of Airbnb, which tends to drive younger people into self-assembly of holidays rather than the package holiday. Because most of my holidays have been self-assembly, and I remember looking at a package. It may well have been the TUI website actually, and thinking, "Geez, this is easy." You just pay once,
Yeah.
and everything is taken care of. You also get, this is something which, of course, I wonder if we need to actually advertise this, because what the public don't know is that you can get a lower overall price when you buy a package, in large part because the hotel effectively subsidizes the flights, because the hotel can't drop its published rack rate below a certain level. So the only way a hotel can fill its rooms is not by dropping the price of a hotel room still further. It's by burying the saving in effectively a subsidy for the flight or the car. This is right, isn't it? I'm right about this.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the principle of a package being an attractive way of doing things. I think there's two things. One is, you say, is price. Is that sometimes you can get a far better deal on a package than you can by doing it as components, and then that can be increased even more when you look at things like all inclusive, where you could literally, I mean, my dad literally could have left his wallet at home and it would have been okay, because actually when you get there, all the food's paid for, all the drinks are paid for. And so that makes that attractive. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect, which came quite to the fore during COVID, was the protection it offers. So actually, if something goes wrong in one part of the plan, it's the tour operator's responsibility to make it right. Whereas obviously, if you've booked the components, the people you've booked the accommodation with don't particularly care that your flight's been delayed. It's like, well, not my problem. So that's, and I think COVID actually highlighted that for a lot of people, or reminded them of that fact.
Because you joined, of course, you must have joined TUI in what, 2018, did you? So it was only 18 months after you joined that COVID hit. That must have been absolutely not what you expected.
Yeah, I mean, I've been actually, I think, in TUI only about 14 months, just to that point where you've got to the point where you think, okay, I'm just about getting my head around this. And then, of course, COVID arrived, and of course, all the rule book was thrown in the bin. And you remember back at the time, even then, it was kind of like, oh, this could be quite disruptive for a couple of weeks. And little did we know that it was going to be pretty monumentally disruptive for, best part of 2 years, really, when you sort of think of all the different lockdowns and phases that COVID went through. So yeah, it was hugely challenging, to the point where literally on a given week, I don't know if you remember the traffic light system, all these things that I've tried to sort of expunge from my head, whereby literally on a Thursday, we would be monitoring Grant Shapps' Twitter, as it was at the time, to find out where we could actually take people on holiday the following week. And I think the public thought that we knew before they did, and we didn't. So we were literally, the second that he said, right, this week, so-and-so's on the red list, so-and-so's on the amber list, the phones would ring off the hook. We'd get, millions of contacts into the call centres, and we would have to then adjust the plan on the fly. So it was very, very complicated, and particularly in the operational interface. Yeah.
No, so you more or less had to reroute flights pretty much on the fly according to what was on the green list. Yeah. Good grief. Yeah.
Oh, and of course, when it first happened, we had to repatriate a vast number of people at the drop of a hat. And actually, we fly from about 20 airports in the UK to make it easy for people to fly from their sort of local airport. But of course, when you need to get 80,000 people back in a hurry, you literally take aircraft to Spain, fill them up with as many people as possible, and just fly them back to an airport. Now, all the people on that aircraft may have come from Glasgow, Aberdeen, Southampton, but you're just trying to get them back into the country. And I actually did. I went to Stansted one evening, and I was there with a clipboard as people arrived, and then I had to sort of get them on the right coaches to get them back to actually where they needed to get to. That was a highly odd evening when no one quite knew what was going on, and COVID was just kicking off. But that's the sort of things we had to do.
It was a pretty heroic effort, actually, what the travel industry did. I mean, given the obvious constraints, obviously, a large number of people. I knew a few people who were stranded completely, by the way. But that obligation to get people home also doesn't really apply if you're booking things as separate. And I think it's worth noting, I think, that the internet sold us on this idea that we could customize everything. And we bought into this dream of disintermediation and everything else. What we forgot was that the internet was actually outsourcing the job of travel agent to the customer.
Yeah.
And actually, I've had occasions where my flight was rerouted from I think Toulouse to Bordeaux, So suddenly the responsibility for rebooking the car hire, for, everything else, suddenly falls to you. And so it is worth noting that in the worst case, there's this kind of, in the best case scenario, self-assembling a holiday works fairly well, but there's an awful lot that actually, the second anything goes wrong, it's a completely different equation. And
exactly.
I suspect actually there will be there'll be a reinvention of package travel, but I suspect it will actually return, because as people become a bit more savvy, they'll actually realize that disintermediation and booking direct isn't always quite the benefit that it appears to be. And they've sold this idea of cut out the middleman, and actually the middleman sometimes performs quite a valuable role.
And one of the things that we're focusing on a lot is what we call, it's not very customer-friendly language, dynamic packaging, which essentially, I suppose, allows the benefits of self-assembly, but with also the benefits of the package. So we've actually signed a deal with Ryanair, which means that people can choose, if they want to go on a Ryanair flight to that hotel rather than go on a TUI flight, because maybe the airport they prefer or the time of the flight is what they prefer. So I think we're starting to get to this place where package is already evolving to a place where you do get some of those benefits of self-assembly, but with also the benefits of the package protection that goes around it.
So does that work with a kind of voucher system? Does it? You get a bit of money off your Ryanair flight?
The plan and the aim is to make it all within, so the customer doesn't necessarily see any difference in terms of the booking system. It's just all loaded in there, and then they can make these choices about what they want their package to look like, and then that becomes the package, and then they go and do it. So, so it's actually making it part of the customer journey and part of the UX of the website, so that they don't then have to go off somewhere else to book a flight or somewhere else to go and book a hotel.
As your family tree grows, so should your investments. From creating a safety net for your family to planning for grandchildren, we have the investment solution for you. 91. Investing for a world of change. 91 is an authorized FSP.
Top 2 challenges, brought to you by ALF Insight.
ALF Insight helps media owners, agencies and marketing service providers improve their new business pipelines by equipping them with in-depth insights, accurate information and daily news updates on the leading and challenger brands in the UK. ALF now also helps sports clubs, venues and charities with new partnership deals. ALF Insight identifies the brands to target at the right time, providing everything you need to tailor the perfect pitch. Visit ALF Insight, that's alfinsight.com, or click the link in the episode description to find out more. One of the things is the line between what you might call travel and leisure is blurring a bit.
Yes.
And you're harnessing this, I understand, by growing from being primarily purely a package holiday operator to a wider leisure experience brand, so you can actually build in not only the usual car hire, hotel, flights, but you can actually buy everything from a cruise or flights to London West End theatre tickets. Tell me more about the thinking behind this.
Well, one of the sort of interesting things about the sector is even defining what that sector is, right? If you talk about leisure, I mean, is it going to the pub? So, are you competing with people's leisure, time, or competing for people's leisure time? So within that, I suppose if we want to continue to grow, we have to think beyond the sort of traditional way of thinking about kind of what we are as a business in terms of a sort of package holiday business. And actually, this is something we've been doing for the last, number of years anyway. So you can go on a ski holiday with us. You can go on a cruise with us. You can go on a city break. You can buy experiences in destination or even in London without having bought anything else from us. So all of these things are now becoming increasingly possible, and it's really, I suppose, partly down to our success in Beach Package. So it was just getting more people to be aware that actually TUI is a far broader offer than it used to be. And of course, we still sell and take a lot of people on package holidays. But we are seeing huge growth in some of these new areas, which would go beyond what people might consider to be our sort of traditional heartland.
One clever thing you can always borrow from the cruise industry, in which you participate quite a lot, is, of course, an awful lot of cruises are actually sold to people on cruises. And it's always struck me a bit weird when I go on holiday that no one really attempts to get me to rebook. Because it's a prime moment where you could get someone to rebook because they already, they've overcome much of their sort of fear and anxiety because they're presumably at the hotel and they like it. And it always strikes me as something that's strangely underexploited, except in the cruise industry, where it's absolutely decisive, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it always surprises me how different people are in their perception. I mean, our summer 2026 program is now on sale. And the day we put that program on sale, there are some people that will be straight in there booking their summer 2026 holiday. I mean, I can barely think about what I'm doing next Thursday, let alone summer 2026. But then, of course, there are other people who will literally book something today and be going on holiday tomorrow. So, I mean, it's another reason why, as a business and as a sector, we need to be, super flexible and understanding of these different requirements of humans and how they like to operate.
So there's some really strange behavioural changes. You might think the young are more spontaneous. I think one thing that's obviously hugely growing is long-haul travel, relatively.
Mm-hmm.
I think ABTA predicted that over a third of holidaymakers are planning to visit long-haul locations outside Europe and North America at the moment. Mm-hmm. And there's another weird trend which would have surprised me, which is Gen Zs are booking more five-star accommodation than any other generational group. Mm-hmm. What's behind that? What's going on there? That's emphatically not what I would have predicted. Is it just that Gen Z spend disproportionately much?
No, I don't necessarily think it's that. I think, and I never know exactly how much of this is sort of backed up by quantitative data, but there is this sort of